like to introduce Jeff Boock, who's probably familiar to most of you. Jeff is a retired architect who's been in a hobby since the year 2000. He started the HO scratch building modified versions of fine scale miniature structures from ads in the railroad magazines and learning his DNRJW and Santa Fe local collection on other people's layouts. He switched over to the dark side years ago and now models exclusively in SN3 and S scale. Jeff is an avid scratch builder and has won numerous awards at national conventions for his models and prototype photography. He is building an enormous layout in his basement that depicts the Chile line from Chama to Santa Fe. No scenery yet, but he promises to get started on that very soon. We're going to hold him to it because he needs to properly display all those beautiful structures he's built over the time. Jeff was the clinic chairman for the last two St. Louis narrow gauge conventions and was the overall chair for the last two SN3 symposiums that were held in St. Louis. Jeff?
Thanks, Pete. I want to, first of all, give accolades to Pete because this clinic would not have happened without his technical help on this, because I'm really a dinosaur when it comes to technology. But what I would like to emphasize is that there needs to be more production in S scale. So Art, there's an opening here for you. I started out, as Pete said, in building this enormous layout from Chama to Santa Fe. But at the same time, I saw so many fine logging layouts that I wanted to have an area that was devoted to logging. And fortunately, the New Mexico Lumber Company did exist, which gives me an opportunity to run the shades that I acquired. So at the same time, there's very little supporting the S scale with regard to logging equipment. So I started scratch building and bashing trucks, donkeys, and dozers. So that's basically what this clinic is all about. The outline of this, basically, we're going to start out talking about trucks, going on to donkeys, and then on to dozers. I used two fine publications that no longer, unfortunately, exist. One is called In Search of Steam Donkeys, that was produced by Timber Times, and also the really great Timber Times magazine that came out about every 2 months. But unfortunately, the gentleman that ran Timber Times ceased to publish, but you can still find In Search of Steam Donkeys on eBay. We're beginning with kit bashing trucks. Unfortunately, there's very little that's available in S scale in logging equipment. These are some of the parts that are going to be necessary to build a truly logging truck that's reflective of what existed in the 30s and early 40s. So these are basically Berkshire Valley parts and Evergreen Hill parts in O scale. And what I like to do at conventions is look at other scales and see what would be appropriate to be used in S scale. These are the truck wheels that go with the O scale tires. These are in O scale, as well as the car springs. This is the truck that I finally was able to find that was from an English company that by going on the internet, I found a S scale 1/64, 1936, what they called a farm implement truck. It was manufactured by Lido. First thing you want to do is remove the truck body from the truck frame, and you can simply drill out the peened over rivets that are underneath so that you can separate the frame from the body. This shows both of them still attached, but once you've taken the frame off, you want to take a razor saw and cut the cab away from the actual truck body that's behind it. Once you've removed the cab itself, you want to file smooth the back of the cab and take the cab itself and literally coat it with a paint remover, because I think they must dip these rather than actually spray them, and it hides a lot of the detail. And once you've used these parts, you can come up with something that looks like this. And basically, you need to put a styrene spacer, 10,000 spacer, between the truck wheel and the truck tires, so that you get a nice tight fit. You also will use the truck springs and new axles on the back portion and extend the truck frame to accept the new frame. The headache rack is actually a brass piece that I've bent with a couple needle nose pliers. On one side, I had one that I felt was appropriately shaped. I built another half dozen using that as my template. Ironically, the water tank that's on the back of that is a Berkshire Valley water cooler, again in O scale. And then the little step loops that are on the side of the steps on the side of the cab are actually HO scale stirrups off of a boxcar cab. This shows the truck itself along with the trailer that I scratch built out of evergreen styrene, and the same O-scale tires and O-scale wheels, again using the shims to get a good proper fit. You can see then the underside of this, to raise the truck body up off of the frame. Now the axles are underneath the frame instead of on top of the frame as they were previously. And you can anchor the headache bar through the bottom of the actual frame. And then the trailer, I ran a brass rod back to what I wanted to simulate, like an air tank or air brakes on this. This shows, ironically, a log load that's a clean product that I basically sized the trailer to fit this log load. And these are, I think, the clean railroad miniatures still is available on the internet. And they make a very nice looking log load, and they also give you some very fine directions on staining and painting. I've always been intrigued by the fact that the trailer fits on top of the truck when they return back with after they distributed the load. So this is the way I simulated that. This just shows that from a different angle. Basically, I said the whole trailer assembly is various evergreen styrene angles, I-beams, and grant line casting. This is another version of what you can do with that same cab. You can see on the cab how much more detail is actually going to be there. I didn't paint anything yet so that you could see the actual different pieces that are necessary, but eventually this will be the West Side Lumber Company orange and black frame. The tread on the top or the walkway is actually a tank detail safety tread piece that was out of a kit, the super detail of tank. And the fill valves on the top are actually HO scale castings used for pipe fittings. This shows the back of the detail of that tank truck. Again, the ladders off an HO scale boxcar kit. And I just used some pieces out of my junk drawer to kind of simulate some pumping equipment on the back of that truck. This is kind of a detail of those various pieces. You can see the piece is kind of an air pump off of the side of a HO scale locomotive. But again, some of the stirrups off of that HO scale box bucket. This is another version with a little longer trailer, because they make different sizes of those lugs. This is, again, another version of a dual wheel version with a bigger log load, so that it has an extra set of wheels on that. Just another view of the headache rack. And this shows the extended trailer and the tandem wheel truck, showing just some variations, so they all didn't look alike. This is again another variation on the same theme, with this being a derrick that will basically be diesel powered. This is an HO scale diesel off of a flat car load, and I kind of simulated the gear and winch mechanism with, again, some detail pieces out of my junk drawer. This is kind of a blow up of that same area, and the levers are just some of the brass that I bent to simulate levers. And then underneath that is a gear mechanism that, with another set of gears that I'm install, will give you an indication of how the whole mechanism could be moved. This is another logging truck that was commercially available from Railmasters, but I just simply added some detail to it, that being the brush guard in the front, the winch off the bumper, the exhaust stacks, the headache rack, and then the rear view mirrors. To just give it some more detail. Just a close up of the brush guard. Again, the same technique of just hand bending the brass rod. And I'm not a big fan of soldering, because I don't really have a good handle on it yet. So this is all put together with CA adhesive. This just shows that whole mechanism, again, from Railmaster, with the detail I've added. Again, the fuel tank on the back, the safety tread, the headache rack, the exhaust stacks, the water tank on the roof, the mirrors, and the brush guard are just detail that I've added to that kit. This shows it with those log loads on it. Moving on to steam donkeys, that book, In Search of Steam Donkeys, has just phenomenal details, photographs, and diagrams. So it gave me a basis of what I wanted to kind of replicate in the mechanism of the machinery itself, as well as the actual steam donkey. And you can get some commercially available pieces like the boilers and the winches from Wiseman Model Services, and you can buy an entire donkey for about $100 that you can build. The nice thing about these is that there really is no scale to a steam donkey until you start to put figures on it, because these things came in all different sizes. And one of the sentences in the book states that once these donkeys left the factory, went out into the field, no two of these donkeys ever looked alike again, because they were modified by the workmen with regard to canopies and what have you that went on top of them. Or you can make your own boiler assembly. This is a Sierra West oil tank and fitting, and then using some brass tubing for the exhaust stack. So a lot of the donkeys I fabricated all of the winch mechanisms and the actual boiler assemblies myself. And you can get a lot of really good tank detail using a Walters industrial tank set. In fact, that tank on the truck came from one of these kits. And you get a lot of assortment within this HO scale assembly from Walters. So there's some fine detail available in all different scales that are appropriate for S scale. You can buy a 2-drum winch, from Rio Grande Models. Fortunately, there's a company that took up Eric Racker's company and is starting to produce some of these. I don't think they've produced the winches yet, but they're starting to make inroads into replicating what was available previously. And you can see one of those tanks that was built from that cornerstone set. And I made a lot of my own winch drums using fluoro wire as the cable, the 26 gauge fluoro wire that you can get from Michael's. By using various gears, it also came from Rio Grande Models, and just some tubing or plastic dowel and creating my own drums. There's a lot of stuff available from precision scale, whistles, the braces that anchor the boiler assembly to the sled. A lot of the different things like the Fairley leads, the cylinders, you can get a lot of those again from Wiseman scale models. Previously, he used to, as well as Western scale models, used to sell what they called seconds in their castings. And they would just have a pile of these on a table. And for about 25 cents a casting, you could buy whatever you needed to put your own kit together. These are some other pieces available now from Western scale models, pipe fittings, valves, and then also from PBL, some of the eyelets that are used for the brake lever on the SN3 kits that are available. You'll see on the steam donkeys for anchoring some of the parts. These are some of the pieces I got from Evergreen Scale regarding piping that I've used on the boilers. You want to start out with the pitch for Jerry with some basswood to simulate the sled. And basically I used a 3/8 by 3/8 and then a 3/8 by 3/16, glued them together for the side runners, glued them together on the side, and then each of the compression pieces has a tie rod that goes through on either side. And the trick to doing these so that they line up is tape the two runners together, and then with a drill press, drill through, and then the tie rods will line up as you put them together. This shows the finished sled assembly, and this is the way I roughened it up with a razor saw prior to staining them with India ink and alcohol and liberal coatings of Bragdon's chalks and earth tone colors. But you can see the tie rods, and eventually the holes on the side get covered up by nut bolt casting. This shows just a myriad of, I got carried away like I do in everything I do, overbuilding things. So I built 16 of these steam donkeys, and I tried to vary them so they all didn't look alike. So I used some of the Sierra West castings that were available for the various water tank assemblies. So you can see the 3 different tank assemblies, and then the weathering that I've done on the sleds and the nut bolt washer casting. And then by using the diagram in the In Search of Steam Donkeys book, I was able to simulate all the apparatus that makes up the winch assembly. And some of this is actual Wiseman kits for the 2-drum winch, and some of this is actual scratch filling, because it doesn't include like the throttle mechanisms and that are available, or the brake mechanism, the cylinder mechanism. And this is some of the detail you can add to give it more realism, and you can see the little PBL eyelets that anchor the rings that were the kind of tie downs, because you have to anchor these things in the woods, otherwise you're starting to drag the logs. You'd also start to drag the sled. So you have to anchor them back, to resist the pulling. But this is some of the weathering I've done. Everything is dripped in, blacken it, and then weathered with gradient shocks. Some of the mechanisms that are available commercially from Wiseman that are shown on this kit. Again, some of this kind of the detail that I've added to the sleds to give it, and the weathering that's done on them. There's various versions of the donkey. This shows the frame for the sport for all the mechanisms is done again out of various evergreen styrene channel shapes. And I tried again to vary each of these so that they all look a little different. Some of the piping that's fabricated. This shows 4 of the 14 of them finished and weathered and painted. And like I say, when you add the figures, it starts to bring scale to it. The log loads that I've cut, to kind of to scale. And then you can see the 26 gauge fluoro wire that I've wrapped around on the various drums. And I've tried to change the winch mechanisms on each of these so that they may not be totally prototypical, but at the same time, it gives some variation. But again, they look logical because they're based off of some of the diagrams of what actually makes up a winch mechanism. But you'll notice the figures, they're all about every one of the guys in front of the boiler is the same figure that was available that I've modified in various positions. Fortunately, they're out of white metal, so you can bend them and change the shape. Again, the variations in the boilers, the donkey in the front is a totally scratch built boiler assembly that's basically, again, a Sierra West oil tank. This is a close-up of the mechanism. And again, this is probably a little bit different from a lot of the prototypical ones. And it has 2 sets of donkey mechanisms so that it has 2 sets of exhaust piping, 2 sets of supply piping, and all the support piping that comes from the water tank, as well as the wood load. And then the variations on the fair leads in the front. And all that piping is built out of evergreen styrene with some of the pipe fittings that were available originally from Western Scale models. They're HO scale piping. And then all the mechanism for the damper, mechanism for the actuate the whistle, those are all bent out of just brass wire. Again, a detail of the mechanism, as I say, this is again a variation on a theme. I tried to add some additional detail, and this is a 2-man saw and gas tank. The 2-man saw is available from Evergreen Fill. But I haven't done a lot of weathering to this yet. I want to add some rust streaks and what have you to give it a little more character. This is one of the donkeys that did very well in a show in Kansas City. I also did pretty well with a couple other ones in Minneapolis at the narrow gauge convention. But this is based typically on a very realistic replication of one of the steam donkey that existed in Oregon, and with the derrick mechanism. The roof is all corrugated aluminum that's been weathered with a technique that would take another 5 minutes for him to describe it, but it doesn't use any archer's etchings. It's all done with paint and Bragdon's chalks. This is again a detail of that mechanism and just the beginning of some weathering on some of the various portions of the donkey, as well as, the weathering on the roof. It's a little more garish on the roof than it actually looks. It's not near that bright. Moving on to another part of what makes up a significant part of the logging mechanism is the dozers, because they pretty much replaced a lot of the steam donkeys. I'm going to the hobby shop again. I always look at military models, and again in different scales. And I found, a Japanese World War II dozer that was made by Tamiya. It's in O scale 1:48. And I thought, this might look very close to what actually existed, in Oregon or Washington. The model on the left is a beautiful 3D printed dozer that, for being a 3D printed piece, it's unbelievable the detail that's available. But it's also unbelievable that it's just under $100 for this dozer on the left. The dozer on the right is what has been built up in the hobby shop as a demonstration of what the Japanese dozer looked like. I bought this for $20. And I figured, with a few modifications, I could make this Japanese dozer look pretty much like the Americanized versions by getting rid of the hood mechanism. Unfortunately, the hood is a separate piece, so you don't have to use it, and then you can cut down the sides to expose the engine assembly that we replaced, that would replicate what was on the other dozer, the best tractor dozer. I had to add a little piece of styrene in the firewall assembly to kind of conceal the fact that there was nothing behind that one. But when you put the motor in, you won't be able to see through. This is the motor that I built up. It has just under 80 pieces that basically replicated in S scale what that 3D printed motor looked like on the 3D printed best dozer. And this was a lot of fun to build. I mean, like I said, it took a lot of Grant line nut bolt washer castings, a little bit of brass wire, and some evergreen styrene tubing and channel shape. And once you insert this into the dozer, and I also replicated the fuel tank out of some styrene tubing, some styrene bands, and fortunately I found a wooden dowel that fit just inside the opening of the tank assembly, so that if you don't have to build the ends of the tank, and you can recess it enough that it gives it some depth. Which you can see when you put the engine into the front of the dozer, it pretty well hides the fact that there's nothing behind it. And this is what you end up with, as a finished assembly. I was able to find about 3 years ago, Bill Banta was going to come out with a brass arch assembly for the PBL brass locomotive or brass dozer that they produced in S scale. And he finally sent me about a month ago some 3D printed kits that not the easiest thing to build because there's no instructions. So fortunately, I went on to the internet, was able to actually find a photograph of this steel arch assembly. But I think it makes a very realistic logging equipment once this is together. I still want to build the overhead frame assembly that will let you operate from the winch, the blade mechanism on this tracking. Another view of that from the other side. I think together, particularly with the steel arch assembly, and then also is available from Bill, the winch assembly with a little bit of cutting and filing fits very nicely into the back of that Tamiya kit. Another thing that helps significantly is the figure from Artista, even though it has a kind of European look. If I can find a guy with like a baseball cap or something like that, I think it'll help, again, Americanize this whole assembly. And last but not least, if you're going to have a logging operation, you've got to have people to make it work. So, as I said, a lot of those figures on the donkeys all came from the rail fan in the center that has a camera on his chest, and he's waving to the locomotive engineer as he passes. So, again, with the fact that we cut a pie-shaped wedge out of his stomach area, remove the camera with a file, you can bend his upper torso over, bend his arms over, and again, the loggers on the left are the figures that I built. The figures on the right come from Aspen Model Works, and again, they're very nice figures. But you can do it for about half the price on the figures on the left-hand side. This is a blow-up again of those figures, and this is again those Evergreen Hill saws, and these are HO scale saws. Well, that's the end of our logging venture. I appreciate your time. If you have any questions for me, you can reach me at bookjcars95@gmail.com.